Welcome to KR Studio. Today, we will continue with episode 2 of the story SS Class Martial Artist Reborn as a Child After 100 Years, Protecting His Clan from Destruction. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Let's dive into the next part now. Enjoy the journey with us. Episode 2 begins. Finally, Chung Myung leaned against the stick he was using as his cane. Finally, the magnificent Mount Hua lay before his eyes. Finally! Tears flowed freely. How hard was it to get here? He'd brushed shoulders with death so many times and arrived using a child's body, no different from an less than an ordinary person's body. Of course, it wasn't anything people usually didn't face on their travels, mostly starvation and exhaustion. But that was dangerous too, right? After his terrible ordeals, Chung Myung had finally reached Mount Hua. Finally. If he wrote down his hardships, it would become a hero's epic, or a beggar's epic. Of course, Chung Myung couldn't ignore the wear and tear on his body. Although he'd accumulated chi, the energy that should have been used to develop his body was spent walking and running. His body had not gotten stronger at all. The constant grating of his bones made Chung Myung grimace in pain. Even his already ragged clothes had been reduced to scraps on his body, and the dust stuck to them? But that wasn't important. Chung Myung had reached Mount Hua. I'll smash the head of anyone who says being reborn would grant a wonderful life. Chung Myung unconsciously squeezed his eyes shut. Who you were reborn as was important. If he was reborn as a beggar without parents or a temple to take him in, he'd rather not be reincarnated. But the suffering ends now. He'd finally reached Mount Hua. So now he would see with his own eyes. What the hell happened to Mount Hua? Let's go. Chung Myung vigorously pushed on his stick and started climbing Mount Hua. After a while, Hua Kak! Chung Myung, clinging to the cliff slopes, heaved like his lungs were going to burst. What test is this? On this mountain? On this all-important mountain? Did it make sense for the path to be like this? He could remember the Shaolin and Wudang sect paths overflowing with incense, but he couldn't see a single person visiting Mount Hua. Chung Myung stared mournfully downward. Endless cliffs stretched before his sight. Was that an exaggeration? Obviously. Nothing was endless. But he was above the clouds. This crazy mountain was so tall, he'd passed the clouds and he still had to walk. This wasn't a road anymore. If this was a road, then a sparrow was a phoenix. Can you call it a road if you can't plant both feet on the ground and have to scrabble forward on your hands and knees? Damn it! What were they thinking, building the sect on top of this mountain? Chung Myung wanted to run up and investigate as soon as he'd reached Mount Hua, but it didn't seem like he'd get the chance. Sahyung, isn't Mount Hua such an auspicious place? Isn't that peak over there shaped like a sword? It seems like the sect established itself in a good place. Shit, damn it. What? Sword-like peaks? Very sword-like. The paths to the sect cut his feet like swords. It was said that Mount Hua was the steepest of the 5 mountains. It was only when he could not use martial arts that Chung Myung really understood. I'm really going to die. It wasn't a joke. He was fully convinced his life was at risk. His limbs were already trembling, and he had such a long way to go. And seeing how empty it was, he understood just how badly Mount Hua had suffered. Ack! Chung Myung groaned and propped himself against the wall. But he couldn't give up. What was the point if he gave up after all this way? If there's a mountain, it's a man's job to climb it. Climb it and rise again with persistence and courage. The truth was, going down was more dangerous. Really. A hand clawed at the top of the cliff's edge. The dusty white fingertips were frail, yet they lifted the rest of the body. Ah! I'm going to die! Chung Myung flopped onto his back, having barely managed to lift his body up. Ha! Ha! Almost fell! He could see the clouds he'd put far below him. Coming this far, as a child, deserved a compliment from himself. It didn't go easily. It really didn't go easily. The good news was, he didn't have to go down the mountain. All that was left was finding the sect. Let's see. Chung Myung struggled to his feet and looked around. That way, in front of him was a road leading towards the summit. From a little way along the road, he could see Mount Hua. Chung Myung's small legs pumped. His heart shook. After 100 years, he finally returned to Mount Hua. Of course, it's only been a month since I got here. but let's use 100 years, because it sounds cooler. Climbing the hill wasn't difficult at all. His body was completely exhausted, but the thought of reaching Mount Hua gave him strength. Ah! The sight of the roof tiles of the main gate filled his eyes with sentiment. River and mountains had changed, but these tiles didn't. The gentle curves still capture the spirit of Mount Hua. Right, on those old tiles? Huh? Old? A tile was missing? Chung Myung rubbed his eyes. Was he mistaken? No matter how much he rubbed, the scenery didn't change. With each step closer, the half-destroyed gate became clearer and clearer. Chung Myung ground to a halt. The main gate was the first thing visitors saw. Even if the interior was damaged, the front gate was always kept grand and neat. But this was the gate of Mount Hua. Its frugal and pragmatic construction exuded the atmosphere of Mount Hua, and it was at least kept neat. But what am I looking at? The tiles were scattered here and there and graffitied all over. They needed to be replaced, and badly, but the cracked, blackened, unpainted pillars were even more horrifying. Spider webs. They had to be removed frequently, so he could understand that. However, it was impossible to understand why they were left where they were so visible. And the fire dragon point. Where did the sign go? The signboard, where did it go? Didn't the signboard symbolize the sect itself? Where the hell did it go? This gate did not read Great Mount Hua Sect. That was the signboard Sahyung cleaned every morning. Where did it go? Where? Chung Myung's legs lost strength. He barely staggered to the main gate, but he had no words left. From what I heard, it's ruined? Mount Hua Sect? I think I've heard of it. Weren't they famous in the past? From what I heard, they slew the heavenly demon and then collapsed. Are they still there? Ruined? Mount Hua? Chung Myung's eyes shook. No, what kind of dog shit is this? Others may despair, but Chung Myung struggled to contain his growing irritation. Mount Hua destroyed. Damn it, not something else, but Mount Hua? Mount Hua? Oh my, Mount Hua is ruined. Mount Hua. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't deny reality. Chung Myung, battered and shaken, finally had to admit it. Sahyung Jangmun, why did this happen? Why? Why did this happen? This suffocating silence. Ugh! Mount Hua could actually be destroyed. No matter what he heard on the way here, he didn't hear a single thing about Mount Hua. He occasionally heard about Wudang sect, Shaolin sect, or even the smaller sects, but not a single word about Mount Hua. This is why I told you to act in moderation, Sahyung. Yeah, you bastard. Mount Hua is a sect. What is the meaning of warriors stuck in the mountains prettying themselves up and acting like big people? Those who ignore the difficulties of others have no right to speak about their troubles. Even then, you should have held back. The elders, disciples, and even the other great disciples were all killed in that battle. Numerous sects said they sent their very best, but there was no sect as invested as Mount Hua. The elders who were supposed to lead the sect died, and the disciples who were supposed to succeed them died. All that remained were the youngest disciples, who had much to learn and hadn't even mastered their martial arts. Who, then, was supposed to carry the name of Great Mount Hua? Right. He could feel his hopes shatter. He could feel it crumbling like the front gate. Mount Hua was destroyed. Sahyung! Sahyung! This is why I said that. Didn't I tell you nothing would be left if we blindly followed the rules of the sect? Do you see what happened? How can you face the rest of the sect in the underworld? You frustrating man! Chung Myung's resentment echoed across the empty mountain. This is crazy. Really. He returned to life after 100 years and found Mount Hua ruined. He fought to protect this, but if this was the result, what were they fighting for, really? He felt the despair creeping over him. It was then, who's there? A voice touched his ears. Chung Myung turned his head. There are people. After a month of travel, this was good news. Someone lived in the supposedly ruined Mount Hua. The heavy, damaged wooden door squealed open on its abused hinges. A man in a black uniform stuck his head through the half-open gate. What? A child? Chung Myung was immediately convinced this man was a martial artist. In the last month, he had hardly ever been called a child. What, a beggar? This beggar? The beggar is traveling alone? He's a beggar. People didn't care if a beggar was old or young. They were beggars just the same, but this man ignored his ragged clothes and dripping sweat and saw him as a child. You came here alone? The middle-aged man looked around, puzzled. How did you manage to get up here alone? That. Chung Myung stumbled over his words. I just walked up. He wanted to say that nothing was impossible with persistence, but it didn't seem like that would go down well in the current situation. With his skinny body, he would raise suspicion no matter what he said. There was no need to make excuses. The important thing wasn't to explain himself, but to take the lead in the conversation. More importantly, I need to ask you something. Huh? The man rolled his eyes. It was absurd for a child to come here all alone, much less start asking questions. Are you a martial artist of Mount Hua? You know about Mount Hua? Am I right? I am, for now. It isn't too late. Chung Myung heaved a sigh of relief. It must be on the verge of ruins. He could tell that from just a glance, but it wasn't entirely ruined, and that was the critical part. Anyway, the legacy continues. Chung Myung resolved himself. First of all, Mount Hua is... Come in for now. Huh? Chung Myung was surprised by the man's kind smile. The sun is going down. Oh? Right, it was already getting dark. The nights are cold on Mount Hua. You've already had a long day. If you risk a night outside, you're likely to freeze to death. Going down the mountain right now is unreasonable. This place doesn't accept guests right now, but I can't let someone who knows of Mount Hua go back alone. Chung Myung's eyes spun. Wasn't this too easy? Come to think of it, there really was no reason for Chung Myung to be wary of him. What could a frail beggar like himself need to be on guard for? If no one came with you and you don't have other plans, come in. We'll listen to what you have to say later. Chung Myung was a little dazed, like something was swelling inside him. Right? This is it? What was the meaning of making a name for yourself with a sword? Even before they took up the sword, Mount Hua sect was famous. Hardly any traces of Mount Hua lingered, but the fires of the mighty sect were yet to be extinguished. Then I will trouble you tonight. Chung Myung bowed his head. Come in. The man ushered him in with a smile. Yes, before that, Chung Myung paused. How should he introduce himself? I don't know. He wouldn't question it, would he? I am Chung Myung. If it isn't too rude, may I know the name of the master? Chung Myung, such a good name. I am Am. The Un family. Chung Myung's eyes twinkled. Maybe the family changed? If it is the Un family, then this man must be the great-grandson? Mount Hua's Chung Myung and Un family were mutually exclusive. Neither family would exist simultaneously. At one time, it would be Chung, and at another time, it would be the Uns. And since it had to have been 4 generations by now, this had to be the Un family. Then he would have never seen me. The last disciples of Mount Hua to see Chung Myung were of other families, so this man named Unam wouldn't have known about him. It felt like so many years had passed since he'd walked through these gates. Chung Myung had been brought to Mount Hua by Sa-young when he couldn't even climb the mountain on his own, and now he'd come back of his own accord. He had to take a deep breath. Considering what they'd left behind on Mount Hua and the circumstances of his return, it wasn't strange for Mount Hua to be bare. No, on the contrary, it was expected, and it wasn't the fault of the current people. It wasn't their fault their seniors had been wiped out while they were still children. In other words, Chung Myung had no right to direct his anger at these people. He should be sorry, if anything. If Chung Myung had been in the same situation, would he have struggled to protect Mount Hua? He would have left it behind and gone to the Wudang sect. Wasn't that just common sense? Right. By what qualifications can I chastise these children? He was ashamed. No matter what else happened, he had to take responsibility. Phew. Chung Myung finally walked inside. Chung Myung had nurtured his sword in this vast hall. The cracked floor, the bluish-white stone. He rubbed his eyes. Bluish-white, no. Where did it go? Why was the ground covered in mud? Sa-young was dissatisfied by the muddy floor just beyond the main gate and decorated it with expensive blue stone. Despite being damaged by their constant practice, he never removed it. So where did all those stones disappear to? Was the current sect leader just more pragmatic than Sa-young Jangmun? He could feel a headache coming. Let's stay calm. Calm and calmer. What was the point of getting worked up over some blue stones? Right, just stones. No matter how expensive they were just blue chunks of rock. Even if Sa-young Jangmun harassed the disciples for scarring it, it was still just a stone. People are born, and so are stones. Stones are born, and so are people. People and stones come and go. Anyway, maybe it was sold. It was more important for Mount Hua to survive than protect the stones. Yeah, that was more important. Let's just calm down. Whoa, whoa. Chungmyung took slow, deep breaths. Thanks to those who kept the name of Mount Hua alive by selling those stones, where did the Heavenly Golden Palace go? Ah, I can't see it. What the hell? The Heavenly Golden Palace was a building, not a living thing. It couldn't just run away, right? But no matter how hard he looked, the Heavenly Golden Palace was replaced by barren ground. There. Chungmyung raised his trembling finger to where the Heavenly Golden Palace should have been. The land there seems strange. Was anything over there? Ah, it seems you have good eyes. There was originally a palace in that space. There was? Where did it go? Haha, it isn't a story a young one like you should hear. Tell me. I know this place better than you. I guess it's a wound of glory. It's embarrassing to say it as a martial artist. Glory, my ass. Huh? Nothing. Chungmyung was at a loss. The blue stones were gone, the signboard was gone, and the best place in the sect was gone. Wherever the wind blew, it found dust. This is Mount Hua? This? He would have believed it if you told him it belonged to those rotten bastards in the demonic cult. Ack! Are you okay? Ah, no, it's nothing. Nothing at all. Every time he inhaled, however, he seemed to catch mouthfuls of dust. It's a little. It seems a little desolate. Unam smiled sadly, a bittersweet expression that hurt Chungmyung. Right? Of course it would be like that. The people who protected Mount Hua, like Unam, were the ones who suffered the most after its collapse. If they had the ability, they wouldn't have let Mount Hua decline like this. If they hadn't been loyal, would they have stayed even as it fell to ruin? You must have suffered a lot. Just the thought of it weighed heavily in his heart. No matter how hard Chungmyung was taking it, it was nothing compared to the sorrow of those who protected it all this time. Come here. Yes. When a guest comes, it is right to give them a place to rest. However, Mount Hua is a sect, and there is a law that guests must follow. I understand you might want to rest, but you must first pay your respects. Chungmyung nodded obediently. Unam brought him to a place similar to a shrine. Although there were several temples of significance on Mount Hua, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Okcheon Temple was the most important. Chungmyung didn't abandon the teachings of Mount Hua, so it was only right to enter and pray. In these trying times, he was grateful that Unam had proposed. And yet, he wasn't ready to see the inside of the temple. The entirety of Mount Hua was in ruins. Could the temple be any different? Let's not be too shocked. He took a bracing breath. This way. Yes. Chungmyung gathered himself and stepped into the temple. And then stopped. Okcheon was cut. All he could see was a portrait, an incense burner, and some small objects. So frugal. Frugal. Chungmyung groaned and shook. Where? Where were the golden candlesticks gifted from the Jin Emperor? Where were golden scrolls inscribed with the ancestors' words? But that wasn't what surprised Chungmyung the most. This. No way. No, where did it go? Chungmyung barely managed to raise his trembling finger towards the front. Huh? There should be a flower, right? A flower? Yes, a flower. How did you know that? It was there, right? Where did the flower go? Unam tilted his head quizzically. There were many things he wanted to ask this child, but his contorted face begged him to answer. Right, there was one there, a plum blossom made of a strange white metal. Yes, that flower. Where did it go? Sold it. Huh? It wasn't particularly useful and didn't fit well with the sect atmosphere, and there was a merchant who wanted to buy it, so we sold it for a good price. Sold? Right, but you... What? Chungmyung's eyes rolled crazily. The white, fragrant plum blossom. Along with the divine sword of Violet Dawn, it was one of the 2 sacred items of the sect. It didn't glitter like gold or shine like silver, yet it was said to contain the very essence of Mount Hua. And these crazy people sold it. There are other things to sell. You sold it, you idiots. The combination of shock and fatigue finally won over him, sending Chungmyung toppling to the ground. He could almost see Sahyung Jangmun's terrified figure. Ruined. Mount Hua was ruined. Completely ruined. Sahyung! Chungmyung passed out. Elder Hyunjong of Mount Hua sect gave Unam a confused look. You mean he came up here alone? Yes. And then he fainted inside Okcheon Temple? It seems like he couldn't even eat properly, but since he climbed Mount Hua by himself, it's natural for him to be exhausted. I guess so. Hyunjong smiled. The ruggedness of Mount Hua made it difficult enough for an adult to climb. The strain it would place on a child would be indescribable. Where is that child now? I moved him to the Plum Blossom Hall. I also called Unjin to check on him, and he said there was no problem other than fatigue. That's good, Hyunjong nodded. Whatever his circumstances, the kid was a guest of Mount Hua now. But it's strange for a child to climb up here alone. Is there no story behind it? After the visit to Akshan, I was going to ask him, but as you know, he fainted and I couldn't ask. I see. But, Unam frowned and explained the plum blossom to Hyunjong. You sold them? Hyunjong tilted his head quizzically. Yes. He said that and then fainted? The elder stroked his beard. Of course, I could have heard it wrong, but it is a long story. That wasn't the only weird thing. Before I could ask him anything, he asked me if I was a martial artist of Mount Hua. Doesn't that mean he came to join? Yes. I wonder what he was planning. Are you worried? Hyunjong chuckled at Unam. It isn't like that. What is so strange about knowing where Mount Hua is? This sect left its mark on history. It's no wonder people would remember it. Right. And he could be a descendant of a Mount Hua member. Ah. Unam nodded. As they were pushed out of the great sects, many people had left Mount Hua. Few had remained to share their fate to the end. If this kid descended from one of them, they would find out. If you're worried he's here to steal something, what is there left to steal? Sect leader. Unam's face fell. However, Hyunjong didn't see that. Sold it. Hyunjong shook his head and smiled. Right. Maybe he descended from a former member since he seems to know what Okchan Temple used to be. It must have been embarrassing for the child. Sect leader. Enough. It's true that we sold it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Maybe it's better not to tell him. Unam gulped. He wasn't telling him everything the boy had said. You sold it, you idiots. He wondered how the sect leader would react to those words. Right. Bring him to me as soon as he wakes up. Yes, sect leader. Hyunjong lost himself to his thoughts. Sold it. It felt like salt being sprinkled on his wounds. The ancestors will never forgive me. No matter how much he wanted to save Mount Hua, how could he face his ancestors after selling the very history of Mount Hua? It hurt to think about. The name of Mount Hua should not end in my time. Hyunjong's face darkened. It wouldn't happen, not even in his dreams. He worked day and night to keep Mount Hua afloat. But with each day, his hope waned. Unam quietly stood up. I'm leaving. Unam stopped just as he was about to leave. Sect leader, If that child wants to join, what do you plan to do? Join. Mount Hua sect didn't accept disciples anymore. However, it would be different if they were a descendant of one of the disciples. It won't happen. Hyunjong nodded firmly. I understand. Wait, yes, sect leader. What's that child's name? Chung Myung. It's Chung Myung. Chung Myung. Hyunjong's expression darkened. Okay, you can go. Yes, Chung Myung? He had the same name as one of Mount Hua's swordsmen. Weird. It was definitely weird. If only he were still alive. If only the famous Plum Blossom Sword Saint had survived that bloodbath, the fate of Mount Hua would be much different. It was a meaningless daydream, but Hyunjong couldn't help himself. So much debt. Hyunjong felt so alone. You damned bastards. Chung Myung spat curses. You had nothing else, so you sold it? It was maddening. Even if they were starving to death, those weren't things they should sell. No matter how shabby it looked, the disciples were dead. The young kids would have known nothing. Right, but even if Mount Hua was destroyed, those couldn't be sold. No, this is better than being ruined. If the ancestors had seen Chung Myung, they would have scolded him. No martial artist should be obsessed with material things. He knew that. He knew it well. Shit, Chung Myung groaned. He looked down at the mountain range. Whenever he'd felt frustrated, he would climb another mountain and look at Mount Hua. When he saw the endless peaks rising through the clouds like swords, his spirits rose. But now, shit. Everything was bad. It was all inside out. It felt like his stomach rotted whenever he saw something missing. The sect has declined. Really, it was more like collapsed than declined. Anything of value was sold. That meant practically everything in Mount Hua. No doubt, Okchan was the last place they touched. After he saw Okchan Temple, he could understand why this place was so run down. They were so destitute, they'd pulled up the blue stones and sold them. Right. I understand everything. Everything else is fine, but this! Why are the martial arts so crooked? Chung Myung rolled around on the floor outside the hall. He would die if he fell off, but Chung Myung didn't have the time to think about it. That old man, not even a third-rate disciple? Talk about fate. Under normal circumstances, Chung Myung wouldn't even be able to guess the level of Unam. No matter how strong he used to be, he was nothing more than a kid now. However, Chung Myung could clearly see Unam's level of martial arts. His senses weren't strong, Unam was just too weak. When Chung Myung was at his prime, Unam wouldn't have even qualified as a student. What am I supposed to do? He didn't even know where to start. He knew he should start from the bottom, but it was too deep for Chung Myung to see. Is this Mount Hua? Do I tell them I'm that Chung Myung? They would curse him, no doubt. If he was lucky, they wouldn't beat him before they kicked him out. Chung Myung wouldn't believe himself either. But let's say they did believe him. Assume the man was infinitely patient and asked him to prove it with his martial arts. I don't have the strength. Chung Myung was like a walking treasure. He had all the knowledge to revive the sect, but not the power to protect himself. Chung Myung knew not everyone was as wonderful as his Sa-young. What if one of them didn't like Chung Myung and decided to take him out? His second life would be stolen, just like that. That's no good either. Then I'll have to revive the sect without revealing my identity. Or at least hide it until he had the means to protect himself. It would be easier to fight the demonic sect. He spat a laugh. He had to teach martial arts to save Mount Hua and himself. He wanted to start hitting people. But if I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have run over here. He owes Mount Hua. The only reason he could walk around saying he was the best swordsman in the world was because of Mount Hua. Yet he'd given nothing back to Mount Hua, only the honor of defeating the heavenly demon. Thanks to that, Mount Hua was on the edge of destruction. How could he ignore Mount Hua? He couldn't. Oh, Sa-hyung. Chung Myung shook his head regretfully. Up in the blue sky, he could see Sa-hyung Jang-moon smiling down at him. Still, it's Mount Hua. Chung Myung heaved himself up. If he didn't want Sa-hyung to murder him in the afterlife, he had to make himself useful to Mount Hua. Damn it, who said anything could be impossible in this world? When he'd first started learning martial arts at Mount Hua, who would have imagined he would become a great master? Everyone had thought they would be lucky if he didn't cause trouble. Chung Myung overcame their cold eyes and became famous in Mount Hua. Challenging the impossible was his specialty. I will make it the best in Murim. Chung Myung's eyes glowed with passion. Everyone in Mount Hua shivered. Where did you go? I was looking around. Looking around? Unam eyes Chung Myung suspiciously. However, Chung Myung crossed his legs and turned to gaze at the sky as if he didn't mind at all. Was this child always like this? The first time he saw the kid, he'd seemed extremely polite. Now it seemed like his behavior had changed. How should he put it? He was full of bad energy? Well, he must be. Judging from his behavior, the kid must have been a beggar for quite some time. Expecting innocence from a beggar in this world would be naive. Have you eaten? I'm not hungry. Chung Myung was being sincere, ironically. The condition of Mount Hua stole away his appetite. How could he overcome the emptiness he felt from looking at this place? Then follow me. Huh? The sect leader wants to see you. Ah, yes. Chung Myung nodded. He had to do this eventually, better sooner than later. The door opened to reveal an old man sitting quietly. Chung Myung was shaken. He certainly deserves to be called sect leader. The feeling of chi was enough to convince him that this man had devoted his entire life to this place. But he doesn't seem to have the courage to speak first. As a sect leader, he didn't lack for anything, but he was lacking as a warrior of Mount Hua. Greetings. Is there anywhere as unhappy as this? Chung Myung sighed. After all he'd been through, this sect leader seemed like a toddler compared to the sect leader of his time. Here was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, offering his greetings to a toddler. I shouldn't have been reborn. What was he supposed to do? Get sick and die? Chung Myung didn't voice any of his thoughts and just bowed. I am Chung Myung. I am Hyun Jong. The sect leader smiled and returned a simple greeting. A guest has come, but we have nothing to treat you. I hope you can understand our current situation. Ah, yes. Hyun Jong's eyebrows twitched. Usually, you would reply, don't worry, or something like, How could an uninvited guest expect much? But the look in his eyes and his gestures indicated this child didn't seem to expect much from them in the first place. I heard you said something interesting in Okshan Temple. Hmm? Sold it? What are you talking about? Chung Myung tilted his head. Hyunjong narrowed his eyes. But it really seemed like he didn't understand what was being asked. He really doesn't know? A child couldn't lie so well. No use trying to read me, you jerk. Chung Myung smiled to himself. He was Chung Myung, one of the best liars in the world. Even Sahyung wouldn't see through his lies or find his alcohol. Hyunjong simply couldn't find any evidence that the child was lying. Did you not say such words? I don't remember well. The only thing I remember was being so tired I fainted. Made sense. He'd climbed Mount Hua with his young body. The kid must have reached his limits. However, if you were that tired, why didn't you say anything? It is said that, when entering the gate, it is necessary to pay tribute to the ancestors. Hyunjong raised an eyebrow at Unam. The child came here all alone, and you dragged him off to make him pray? Huh? Unam blinked. No, he was perfectly fine. The kid was perfectly fine until he entered the gate, and then he passed out from exhaustion? What kind of crazy story is that? Unam shot Chung Myung an accusatory look, but Chung Myung's eyes were wide and innocent. Hyunjong nodded. That sounds reasonable. Apologies for our inattention. It's fine. Right, another question. Yes? Why did you climb all the way up this steep mountain? Don't say you came here on a whim. Mount Hua isn't something people climb for the novelty, much less a child. A sharp question. But Chung Myung had his answer prepared in advance. Sect leader. I'm listening. I want to enter the Mount Hua sect. You want to enter? Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Yes. Hyunjong stared at Chung Myung, but he couldn't see anything from his innocent eyes. Does that mean you climbed up here with a purpose? Yes. Hyunjong nodded. Mount Hua wasn't a place for tourists. You want to enter Mount Hua. This means you know of Mount Hua? Yes. Enter. Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Chung Myung licked his lips. It makes sense. Chung Jin was chased by the demonic sect and disappeared before the final battle. A missing person, not dead. Chung Jin fell off a cliff. A woodcutter found him and helped him heal. However, the injury was too severe for him to ever fully recover from. As gratitude, he took the man as his disciple and taught him the martial arts of Mount Hua. And Chung Myung is the descendant of that woodcutter. Superb. A flawless script. The best thing was that Chung Myung had control of everything he said. This story had no loopholes, and he was guaranteed to be accepted as a member of the sect. Even if I won't get the same fame as in the past, he would at least be treated well, even if they didn't think too kindly of him. Now, ask me the reason, and then he would unfurl his script. It would be a breeze. From, I accept. Yes, of course the entry, what? Chung Myung boggled at Hyunjong. Contrary to his expectations, the sect leader just nodded at him. If you want to join, we should let you. Huh? No, wait. Was it so easy to gain entry into this place? A totally unfamiliar child? Sect leader. Unam was equally shocked. Didn't you say we won't accept new students? Yes, ask him. I changed my mind. Hyunjong grinned. Truthfully, we aren't in a position to accept new students, but we cannot turn our backs on a child who came all this way knowing about Mount Hua. Ha. Unam. Yes, sect leader. Things go round and round. Whatever the child is, he came to us on his own 2 feet knowing of Mount Hua. Are we going to kick out those who searched us out just because we aren't as great as in the past? If someone else heard this, they might have been impressed. However, after all of Chung Myung's preparations, it was just making his skin crawl. What is this? Aren't they supposed to be suspicious of someone they don't know? How did he even become a sect leader? No, he must have become a sect leader because he was like this. Ah, no, before that, I live. It's fine. Hyunjong shook his head firmly. It doesn't matter what kind of life you lived before this. Whether you were a sinner or a thief, the moment you climb up Mount Hua, your past disappears. Of course it did, but it couldn't be that simple. No, I told you it was fine. Man, it isn't okay. Listen to me. Unam. Sect leader, give this child a place to stay. Yes. Your name is Chung Myung? Chung Myung nodded. A very nice name. A very good name. Chung Myung of the Chung family. The sect leader chuckled. This must be fate too. You don't need to get a new name for him. You might not know, but your name means a lot in Mount Hua. Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Would anyone be worthy enough for that name? Yes, Chung Myung replied. I'll see. Chung Myung stood stiffly, and Unam escorted him away with a sullen expression. This way. The landscapes of Mount Hua caught his eyes as he stepped outside. I've entered. Entered. Unam interrupted his thoughts. The introduction ceremony hasn't been held, but from this moment on, you are a disciple of Mount Hua. You will become a vessel for the martial arts and the youngest disciple of Mount Hua. Youngest? Chung Myung's eyes trembled. Youngest? Him? The Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung, the youngest? Heh! When Chung Myung's amusement leaked, Unam couldn't help but smile. You seem happy. Yes, so happy. Ha ha ha! But why were tears falling? Shit, the child. I sent him to the dorms. I think we can just proceed with the ceremony right away. I see. Unam stared at his feet. Hinjong, seeing that, gently smiled. You don't seem to like this. Rather than not like. Unam hesitated a little, then opened his lips with a sigh. Sect leader, I just don't seem to understand the meaning of your actions. Why was the child taken in? Now is the time for us to reduce the mouths we need to feed. Yes, that's true. And he isn't just some child, but one who doesn't even have any talent for martial arts. Above all, I don't feel even a single ounce of kindness from him. That child doesn't seem to fit the standards of our sect. So why bring in such a kid into our Mount Hua? At Unam's points, Hyunjong smiled. You think so? Sect leader. Unam took a deep breath. Sometimes this old man was confusing. I can never understand him. Even after assisting this man for over 10 years, Unam still couldn't understand him. Hyunjong's thoughts were too deep for him to understand. Unama? Yes, sect leader? Sometimes relationships come unexpectedly. Hyunjong smiled brightly. Maybe that child could turn into a light for Mount Hua? That child is too young to be the light of Mount Hua. He could be. Hyunjong's face darkened. The current state of Mount Hua was similar to a wind chime. Holding itself up was hard, and no one would bat an eye if it fell. That was the reason why Unam didn't want Chung Myung to join. How much sadness would Chung Myung feel if he was left alone right after joining? How would he feel suffering so much to get here only to be pushed back onto the streets? I know the situation is difficult. Hyunjong opened his mouth. But Unama, plum blossoms are bound to bloom even in snow. The plum blossoms in the harsh cold are bound to give off a sweeter scent than normally brought plum blossoms. If we don't plant seeds just because the winter has come, won't that mean that the possibility of plum blossoms in snow will disappear? Yes, right. So go and see. As Unam quietly closed the door, he shook his head as he sighed. Each time he talked with Hyunjong, he felt like his heart was being ripped open. However, as of today, even after talking with Hyunjong, his heart didn't feel refreshed. At Hyunjong's words, his thoughts still stayed and mind was still fuzzy because of the current situation of Mount Hua. The current Mount Hua couldn't be saved. Hyunjong worked hard all his life, but the situation just kept getting worse. If things went on like this, they wouldn't last another year. Whenever he thought Mount Hua, which had such a valiant history, was coming to an end, his heart would ache. Where is our Mount Hua heading? Unam closed his eyes. Chung Myung blankly lowered his head looking at the clothes he was wearing, a white robe which caught his eyes. Looking at the 5-petal plum blossoms engraved near the chest, he felt strange. It made his entire body tickle. No, this is really itching me. The material of the clothes was so bad that each time it touched the skin, it felt like it was grating on his skin. If he hadn't experienced those rags on before, wearing this would have troubled him even more. The month of living as a beggar seemed to have helped him. Shh! Chung Myung frowned. It's changed. In the past, Mount Hua wasn't a clan with money overflowing like the Wudang sect or Shaolin sect, but still it had enormous wealth hidden in. Of course, he couldn't spend the money to his heart's content because of Sa Hyung, whose greed for money never let anyone touch it. At the very least, he would dress the disciples of the sect with nice clothes and feed them good things. But the clothes were all ragged now. What did these people do with all that money? There must have been heaps of money in that safe. No, forget the safe. They even sold off the historically important items inside the sect for money. So why were they dressing the kids like this? Not able to dress them properly, not able to teach them properly, doesn't this mean that they just wasted all the money they got? Chung Myung took a deep breath. There is no such thing as a straight walking path. Sigh. The more he thought about it, the more his head hurt. Expectations only lead to disappointment. Anyway, I joined. He managed to join. The worst disaster happened, in which he ended up being the youngest of Mount Hua. This wasn't what Chung Myung wanted, but at least he managed to enter the sect. There are a lot of problems which will have to be solved, but isn't this just the first step in a 1,000 miles path? No matter how difficult the task is, there is nothing that cannot be done if it is tackled one step after another. Most things in the world can be solved like this. But where is this place? That was the problem. Where Chung Myung was located now was a hall in the past. However, it was changed in the meantime. The past appearance of the hall was turned into a dorm. If Chung Myung's memory hadn't failed him, there was no concept of accommodation in Mount Hua. Those who were newly admitted into the sect would start living with their master. Then what was he doing now? I can't see this as a place where I stay before I enter the wings of another master. No matter how he looked at it, it was a place made for the sake of humans to live. Am I the only one here? Chung Myung came out of his room. The rooms were lined side by side around the narrow hallway. It was different from the appearance of the past. Chung Myung opened the door to the next room and showed clothes and other items in it. Is someone staying here? Chung Myung tilted his head. Who would dare to live in such a messed up room? Who are you? Chung Myung turned his head. Oh my! He didn't even notice that someone was approaching him. He had made a mistake. Ah, I forgot. I don't have martial arts now. Even though he came to Mount Hua, he didn't learn martial arts yet. Thanks to that, only his body got stronger after qi cultivation, which was the foundation. Realistically speaking, the only thing he could do right now was gather the internal qi, which was as small as a fingernail, which meant it was impossible to be anywhere close to where he was in the past. Who are you, you bastard? Spying in on someone else's room? A thief? A rough mouth, a child who seemed to be the same age as Chung Myung. As the child yelled, more kids rushed out. What? Joe Gul. What is it? The child called Joe Gul pointed to Chung Myung. This jerk was spying into my room. Who is he? Looks like a newcomer? Chung Myung looked at the ceiling. Why did I have to come back alive? Was it to witness such a cruel situation? It was heartbreaking to see the young people point fingers at him and call him whatnot. In terms of age, Chung Myung was their great-grandfather. Of course, they couldn't possibly know that. But how should he reconcile the meek and disciplined students of Mount Hua to the current disciples who were using their mouths like neighborhood gangs? As he opened his mouth to speak to the guy with messy hair. What is happening? Ah! Teacher Unjeom! At the low voice from behind, the kids began to move left and right, and a huge person came down the stairs. Clumsiness, which reflected on his face and gestures. And it was evident that this kid hurt not a single person till now. As he was called, Unjeom glanced around with his sharp sword-like eyes, befitting his name. Why are you all making a fuss during your training time? Who said it was fine for you to do this? No, it isn't like that. My uniform was dirty, so I came to get a change of clothes. How dare you give me excuses? I apologize. The frightened children all backed up a step. In the meantime, they all looked at Chung Myung. You are? Chung Myung. You must be a new member of the White Plum Blossom Boarding House. White Plum Blossom Boarding House? This is the White Plum Blossom Boarding House. These are the dorms where the disciples of Mount Hua live. Didn't you hear about it? Dormitory? The man frowned. Don't you know that you should speak in a respectful manner? Ah, yes, I apologize. Calm down. Damn it. Once again, he didn't think it through. The children who hadn't even entered Mount Hua during his time would be masters now. This is so messed up. To have the position of a teacher, this man must be really skilled. He was sure that he would be forced to work for his life here. You too, come along. Yes? Whether you are late or early, you need to practice. It wouldn't make any difference. It is the job of a disciple to never waste time in vain. Chung Myung could help but agree to the statement. In order to change the terrible situation, Chung Myung had to strengthen himself even a day sooner. For that, an environment where he could focus on training was necessary. The problem was that what they were trying to teach him would be basic martial arts which are useless to Chung Myung. Come. The man left first, The children followed after him. However, one of them turned back. It was Joe Gull. "I'll see you tonight." "I'll fix that head of yours." "Right, right. Don't bother thinking about running away." "Sure, come." "You really are." "What are you doing?" The child, startled by the shout of Unjeom, responded. I am coming, teacher." Seeing the child run ahead, Chungmyung sighed. "I need to treat them well." They were all the descendants of the sect. Of course, the way Chungmyung showed favor to the kids would be different from others. They deserve it. Chungmyung smiled as he moved. That's the end of episode 2. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me.